Oh yeah, that's what the theme music sounds like. Well, hello there, nonfiction branders. It's me, DP, and it's time for another edition of IMNSHOW, in my not so humble opinion, the periodic show where I come on live and talk about things I'm interested in, or in this case, sometimes I do a live podcasting session with someone that I've invited on the Nonfiction Brand podcast, which looks a little something like that. Nonfiction Brand podcast, of course, comes out every Monday, and it features a lot of guests from around the world, around the country, and a whole lot of people who've got a lot to say, who are experts in their own area and stuff like that. And one of the things I've been trying to do is reach out and cast a wider net so I can find other people other than the usual suspects. You know, I want to find people from other parts of the world with different points of view and all that stuff. And boy, do I have a treat for you today, because this dude is already in tomorrow on the other side of the world in Singapore. Yeah, I'm talking about a gentleman you're just about to meet named Rayson Choo. Now, why don't I kick right away to the two shot so you can see this gentleman from Singapore all the way on. Let's see, if today is Wednesday. Is today Wednesday? Yeah, today's Wednesday in the U.S. It's Thursday morning in Singapore. So, that, you know, I'll be honest with you, Rayson. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on this podcast is because you literally are from an entirely different point of view than anybody in my hemisphere of the world. You are in Singapore, the city that I think most Americans would know from either Westworld, the new version of Westworld on HBO, or Crazy Rich Asians, which was shot pretty much completely in Singapore, right? So if you need an image for where Rayson is right now, just picture yourself. He's on one of those high rises with the incredible pools overlooking the wonderful waterfront in Singapore and all that stuff. So anyway, welcome to the Nonfiction Podcast, Rayson. I'm so happy to have you on. Thanks for making the time.
Well, it's really my honor and pleasure to be on your podcast as well. Really appreciate it. And man, I'm really grateful to be able to share some of my insights, some of my tips and advices, and even golden nuggets that I've learned over the past 7, 8 years in my whole life of building my brand up. I'm really looking forward to rock and roll out with you.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to have you on, and I find that really interesting because, you know, personal branding has been a growing, pretty big thing in the United States ever since Tom Peters wrote the very influential article in Fast Company magazine in 1997 about personal branding. But and sometimes we in America like to think we're ahead of the game on everything. But that's not necessarily true, because if you've been working on building your brand for 7, 8 years, you're certainly ahead of the curve when it comes to a lot of people here in the United States. Why did
Mhm.
you start building your brand as long ago as 8 years ago? Did you Are you
Well,
okay? Can you hear me okay?
yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Did you hear my question?
Yep, I heard your question, and that was like, why did I actually build my brand 7, 8 years ago, right?
Yeah, why
So
did you
basically,
what got you started?
well, what got me started was because I actually did something really silly in the past. Man, I would say, man, I didn't expect this. In fact, like back then, I thought when I graduated from the army, which all Singaporean boys have to go through, right? I thought, man, I got to go through the army and then came out with a diploma in nursing, which is what I have. Um, and then I'm going to go wherever I want, do whatever I want in terms of nursing. But somehow or rather, I didn't make it through in terms of that, because my first job as a Japanese clinic nurse, I didn't really do pretty well in that first job. And you know what? I pretty much got myself fired during the first job within just few months, just 3 months or so, and I got so pretty down and very upset with myself. I was very disappointed in myself. So I asked myself, what on earth do I want to do? Right. So I started to actually not just, I would say negative things about myself, feel so negative about it, but I told myself that, hey, I need to buck up. I need to be better than who I was that time. And I told myself I'm gonna be better than who I was 5 years from then. And then after that, I decided to work on myself. I reflected and I decided to work on myself. I went on to read and realized that, hey, personal branding is very, very important. So I started off that journey to improve on myself, and man, I chanced upon a lot of stuff. I chanced upon Ty Lopez, I chanced upon Gary Vee, I chanced upon Cardone, and all these other influential entrepreneurs. And I also happened to chance upon this podcast called Addicted to Success. So I was so drawn by this podcast because, man, this guy by the name of Joel Brown, at that point of time, he was pretty much a newbie. Same goes with Lewis House. They're not so well known in the States at that point of time, or even in Australia. And then after that, I realized that, hey, these guys, they are able to do something very, very impactful and yet amazing and magnificent. And that was to actually interview celebrity entrepreneurs or even authors like Oprah Winfrey, Tony Robbins, especially when I saw Louis House interviewing Tony Robbins in his private jet. I was asking myself, hey, if these guys can actually do something like this, what about myself? What about me? So I decided to actually work on it and decided to start off to have that dream of having my own podcast. And that's where I decided, hey, you know what? This is something I'm going to work on and I'm going to build up from there. And I want to have the best entrepreneurs, the best people that can actually come on board to share and add value as much as possible, not just to myself selfishly. Yes, it's for me, but in a more generous way, it's for the audience that has been following me as well, and the people that has been following my journey as well. So I decided to work on my personal brand. I decided to work on this podcast called the Raygacy Show, and I decided to actually not just be playing so small in the nursing field, but I want to be bigger outside of my work, outside of my job scope, and that is to build a podcast and build, probably I would say, an empire for myself in a sense, so that once I find that this empire is rich enough, is good enough, I can decide to actually say bye bye to nursing. Even though nursing is really a I would say a pretty much meaningful job, but I believe that the amount of impact that I can have with Raygacy will be way more as compared to nursing, in my own opinion.
Well, I just want to stop you for a second and underline a couple things for our audience. You were hit in the head with a brick by being fired from your first job post-Army. You
Yeah.
spent some time licking your wounds and probably feeling bad about yourself, but then you started pulling yourself out of whatever depression you might have felt and started to look for inspirational resources. You found them, and then you started studying them. Whether you thought of it as I'm studying them or not, that's what you were doing. You were studying who they were, how they do what they do, and what value really means. Because I'm guessing you learned that if I find it valuable, my listeners could potentially find it valuable. Therefore, it is valuable. And I think those things are so important because, like a lot of people who are faced with job loss or health issues or anything like that that may leave them not in the best place, a lot of the people like that look around for solace, for some healing of some sort. I think you went the right route, which is find inspiration. Because if you're inspired, you're already looking up and you're going to get out of your hole and you're going to start doing stuff. And another thing I want to underline for the Nonfiction Brand podcast audience is the dude is a nurse. And his podcast is not about nursing. It's not about medicine. It's not about health and wellness. It's not about professional medical blah, blah, blah. It's about something he's developed a real passion for, right? The what I would
Yep.
call entrepreneurial business space. Why
Yep.
did you choose that? I mean, was it because the people who inspired you were the ones who literally lit that fire in your mind?
Well, I would say that, at the start, um, this podcast was just for authors, for books and authors, right? To introduce the books. But then after that, after the first interview, I realized that, hey, my Facebook has a lot of people inside, like a lot of entrepreneurs that are in my Facebook list, my Facebook friend list. So I decided to go and asked myself, hey, what is it that I want to do, right? I want to interview, I want to be an entrepreneur in the future as well. And I thought, hey, why not just interview these people, like interview all these people and get their knowledge, be it generic knowledge on entrepreneurship, on business, on how to start a business, how to create your own systems, how to brand yourself and things like that. Get myself started, and that's where I started to go on in depth, um, not just interviewing authors, but I branch it out to interviewing entrepreneurs, and I even had a team, uh, for the first time, for the first year. In fact, I actually had a team where I had, because I had quite a number of relationship coaches who are my acquaintances, my friends as well. So I decided to interview them as well. So that's where I said, hey, why not just go and interview these relationship coaches about dating and relationship, and then after that, slowly as it goes, I realized that, wow, entrepreneurship is something that I'm very passionate about, and that's where entrepreneurs started to pour in and start to ask me, hey, do you want to interview me? And then there are even people from PR companies that actually that they are not based in Singapore, but they are based in the States. They decided to reach out to me. I'm not sure how they got to know about my podcast, but they actually reach out to me and asked me to interview their clients as well. And that happened right after Gary V came onto my podcast. And
Mm.
that's all these amazing things that has happened. And then slowly and surely, the amount of people came were pouring in. There was a lot of them, and until I was pretty much, I would say, overwhelmed in a sense, because there's so many people who are reaching out to me, influential entrepreneurs in Singapore, influential entrepreneurs in the States as well. They reach out to me, they ask me about my podcast, and the PR companies reach out to me and ask me on their behalf as well. And I just told them, hey, you know what, let's do it. And then some people I had to bring it from, um, for example, like this year January, they inquired, they had to wait until probably June or July to actually be interviewed as well, or some even had to wait until, from last year they had to wait until this year, then they got the interview, um, slot as well. So it all transformed from just talking about introducing the author and their book into just entrepreneurship and business and personal branding and everything else that encompasses entrepreneurship. This very, very huge topic.
Well, and it's interesting because often people will ask what has to come first, the chicken and the egg question. Which came first, chicken or egg? Do you have
Hmm.
a podcast before you have a theme? It sounds to me like, yeah, for you, you start a podcast, it starts here, and then it starts moving a little bit. But the unifying thing is the whole podcast platform that did not lock you into a theme that you had to have forever, but it allowed you to calibrate a little bit at a time that podcast to match what you're most passionate about, and also, frankly, the type of people you could get. I mean, once Gary V comes on your podcast, Gary Vaynerchuk, he gives you the stamp of approval, that's going to get a lot of people's attention. And it verifies that you are, in fact, someone worth talking to. So kudos to you for that. But the biggest kudo I can give you is the fact that you, again, you, as a recently unemployed nurse, got over the pain of that job loss, started looking around, got inspired, found podcasting, started really not just, being a consumer of podcasts, but starting to become a creator of a podcast until you get to the point where you have a podcast, and then you get big names actually wanting to be on it. Which came first? I'll tell you right now, the podcast came first. The theme doesn't have to be perfect from right out of the gate. And frankly, I'm sure you feel the same way. The first 25 podcasts you do are pretty bad because you're still getting your voice. You're still working on getting your equipment working correctly. You aren't sure exactly how long it should be, how short it should be. Do I have theme music? Do I have some big intro? Do I not have an intro? All those things you're trying and you don't know until you do it. But the thing is, you get better incrementally. So if you know you're going to get better incrementally, start doing it now, because the next time's going to be a little bit better. The time after that, a little bit better, a little better. And then you get to the point where, wow, I've got a show that people are clamoring to be on. I'm getting known in my area. And by the way, the other thing I want to underline is the dude is in Singapore. Singapore is on the southern tip of Malaysia. Isn't that right?
Oh, yes. And we are just a tiny speck on the map that you can ever find, which you will take many, many, many minutes to find that small little spot on the map itself. And we are so small. And I couldn't believe that, wow, I could reach out to so many people around the globe, not just in Singapore, Malaysia, not just in Southeast Asia, but reaching out to America, reaching out to Canada, and even to Europe as well.
Well, because one, you may think Singapore is small and very kind of out of the way. To everybody on my side of the pond, we're going, ooh, Singapore, that's a really cool place. I'd love to go there sometime. I've seen it in movies. It's very kind of, it's an epicenter for Asian economic activity. It's a hop, skip, and a jump away from just about every Southeast Asian country in the world. And, so it's really exotic. So talking to you is a whole lot more interesting than for me to talk to someone from, let's say, Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, to you, talking to someone from Las Vegas might be really, really cool. Well, to me, it's like, well, I'm an American, they're an American, big whoop. But, so you got to play the cards you're given to the right people. So for you, you got on my radar, not all because you're from Singapore, but I'll be honest with you, that was the thing that really caught my attention, because in my head, I'm going, wow, if I could get known a little bit in Singapore, that would help me. I'm not a big one for following the analytics of my podcast on I use Podbean as my podcast host website. They have pretty good analytics. I don't pay much attention to them. But a friend of mine said, at least look at what countries you've got listeners in. And she said, because I've got 27 countries. And I'm like, wow, 27? I looked on mine. I've got 42. So,
oh, wow.
I was like, are you kidding me? Now, and that becomes now a great number for me to tout to someone like you to get you to come on my podcast. Well, I've got listeners in 42 countries around the globe, and I would love to have you on as a guest. Well, that's a whole lot sexier than I'm in my basement in my house in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Do you know where Wisconsin is? It's in the United States. Talk about a little pinpoint. Go ahead, look that up sometime on a map, and you'll find out that Sun Prairie is just outside the capital city of the state of Wisconsin, which is right in the middle, the upper middle of the United States. So you need a magnifying glass. Let's put it that way. Anyway, so Rayson, the how long did it take you to from episode 1 to episode what to feel really comfortable as a podcaster and start attracting the type of guests that you wanted for your podcast?
Well, it took me a while, because my podcast actually started off with just Facebook Live, because I thought, like, people in Singapore, especially in Singapore, I've seen like people are misusing Facebook Live back in the days in 2016, 2017. They're actually misusing it. Like, they are filming people committing suicide, unfortunately. They
Mm.
are filming people having fights in a coffee shop. They are filming people having fights in school, bullying in school, and things like that. And I thought to myself, why not do something different, something probably interesting in a sense? And that is to interview entrepreneurs and get them to share insights, get them to share about their life, their inspirational stories with the people that are tuning in on Facebook, so that people will find it entertaining and also at the same time educational for them. So that's where I started to do that. And then from the first episode until, I would say, probably the 20th or even 28th episode, which Gary Vee came on, that got me more comfortable in a sense. It took me a while, I would say. Even when Gary Vee came on, I was still pretty nervous, right? So it took a while, and then after that, Uncle G, Grant Cardone came in. I got more comfortable, especially when I reached out to Uncle G. He came on, and I started to feel more comfortable and at ease. Even though I had some friends who advised me, who are speakers themselves, and they advised me what to say, how to do it, how to make it more impactful kind of podcast, so that the guests themselves can remember me, remember the host, because it is very important for the guests to not just build a friendship with you through the podcast, but also at the same time build a, I would say, quite an impressionable impression on you, I would say. So that's how I actually started off, and then slowly got even better and better and better and better, and got people feel more comfortable, like as if we are having some coffee chat at Starbucks, and we are recording this chat together, all together in a sense. So this is how it all started off, and then it eventually bloomed to me, to my surprise. In fact, I never thought that I would be so comfortable talking to people who are of a bigger stature, higher capability, higher, I would say, stature than me. So I was like, wow, it's a really really big journey for me. It's really a big jump as well for a nurse, especially for a nurse to actually speak to entrepreneurs who are multi millionaires, and some, I would say, even reaching to the billions already. So it's not something that a nurse would be doing, because nurses will be talking to the occupational therapists, physiotherapists, or if it's in my workplace, which is an asylum, right? We'll be talking more towards the doctors who are psychiatrists, psychotherapists, for example, right? Rather than speaking to entrepreneurs, chefs, talking to magician who is like one of the famous magician in the States, who performs for billionaires, right? And all the other amazing people, or even talking to you in person, right? No nurses would have ever dreamt of that, unless if they were to be in the clinic and you happen to go to for an appointment, for example, go and see a doctor, then they would probably have a glimpse of you, have a glimpse of Gary or Grant or whoever, and they'll be speaking to them for a short moment of time, like, oh, your wife is in this room, or hey, you're going for X-ray, you should go here, and that's it. Nothing much about,
Yeah.
hey, how to do business, hey, how do I build my brand, how do I grow as a person, how do I, what are the books to read, and etc., right? No,
Yeah.
no one would ever be able to do that. And I thought to myself, why not be that one to step up and step out of my comfort zone and go out there and talk to these people and learn and grow and incrementally improve on myself every single day, every single year.
Well, longtime listeners of this podcast will have heard me say this over and over again. You're doing what I advise everyone to do, which is step out of the shadows and into your own personal spotlight, because you have a story to tell. You have a point of view that's worth being heard. You have questions that people would love to answer. You also have unique things to offer them, not the least of which is where you're located geographically. I mean, am I going to sell a bunch of nonfiction brand books in Singapore? Probably not, but I don't know what is going to happen by being on your podcast. I just know that it's a whole lot more than I had the day before, more possible opportunity. It's like you got to think of stuff like that as like you're just exposing yourself to many more possibilities simply by having a conversation with someone else. You don't know where that network could go or how it could help you, especially if you create and cultivate, protect and project your personal brand. I mean, you've mentioned it a couple times about building a personal brand that's not predicated on your job. Because keep in mind, based on everything I've heard from you, nursing is a job for you, not necessarily a lifetime career. Your career could take some of the aspects of nursing, the helping people, aiding them as they struggle to recover, to become better in their lives, empower them, inspire them. These are all things nurses do, right? They're also what Rayson Choo is doing every podcast episode of his Raygacy podcast, which you can find everywhere. Find podcasts are free. Just look up the Raygacy Show, which actually you can see Raygacy spelled right down there at the bottom of the screen, Raygacy. That the Raygacy Show. Look for that wherever you get your podcast for free, and you will find the dulcet tones of Rayson Choo will guide you through a whole bunch of interesting stuff, including what I would call a Southeast Asian perspective on all things entrepreneur, all things personal branding, all things interesting and exciting, directed mostly toward the world of business and things like that. So again, I applaud you, because as you say, no other nurse, I'm going to say probably with 100% degree of certainty, that no other nurse in Singapore is doing a podcast about anything. And certainly none of them are getting an international profile based on anything they're doing. So you're doing it, and kudos to you, man.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the compliments. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, I think I'm hoping that the listeners to this podcast episode are being inspired and saying, hey, if Rayson, who's in this tiny city-state country in Southeast Asia, can get on Gary Vaynerchuk's radar, on Grant Cardone's radar, are you kidding me? And not only are you on their radar, but they're coming on your show? Are you kidding me? And he doesn't have an MBA from Harvard or Stanford. He doesn't have a startup, tech startup that was funded for $1 billion. He's just a young man from a small country who said, I'm not going to be hampered by the fact that I'm both young and from a small country. Instead, you're taking the energy that young men have and applying it to a platform that enables you to talk to people around the world. I mean, I'm a podcaster because I realized one day, you know what? What does it cost to actually create a podcast? Sure, you got to have a microphone, you got to have a decent computer and some nice bandwidth. You've got to have a podcast host, website, which will cost you from $5 to $10 US, depending on who you go with. Mm-hmm. And the rest of it's free. Like right now, I am talking to a guy on the other side of the world with video for free. And I'm getting
Yeah.
my voice out there into the world for free. So you got to say, how many barriers do you have to not have to get off your butt and do something like this? So Rayson, when you started, did
Yep.
you what type of technology did you have when you started your podcast?
Well, I only had a phone and a stand, a phone stand, and then slowly I upgraded to from I would say just these two equipment. I started to have a mic on a dual mic, right? And then after that, it became this platform where I have my own laptop, my own webcam, and then a mic by HyperX. So yeah, it took me a while, but before this mic came in, it was just a Sony headphones, um, which I really love, which is WMX 11003 or something like this. It is like one of the best headphones I would ever recommend people to actually go and purchase it. It's by Sony as well. It's one of the better versions.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I only use this few equipments, very few people that I know of, right? They are doing podcasts in Singapore. They are actually doing way. They are investing a lot in their equipments. They are having their rodeo mics. They are having their DSLR. They are having a lot of different cam views like what DP is having right now. But I just wanted to keep it, I would say user friendly for myself. And I don't think I would want to use this podcast, I would say to go like to have DSLR versions and all this other stuff. I just felt that hey, I'm just comfortable with this right now. But if let's say I happen to have like really special guests coming over, then probably I would have a team of my friends who are doing all this video production and all. Then they'll help me film. Other than that, no, I'll just use my phone, or I'll just use my laptop, and that's it, right? Because it's very simple. You don't have to have superbly expensive high-end technology kind of equipments to let you start your own podcast or start your own video recording or start whatever that you want to do. Because the more you tell yourself that hey, I need to have a DSLR from Canon or Olympus or whichever, or Nikon or whichever brand that you like, and it will cost a bomb. It will cost like few $1,000s. And every time if you're working a day job and night job and whatever job that you're having to sustain for your family, and then you have this passion and you want it, and then what will be stopping you? All those things that you've been thinking of, like, oh, I need this mic, I need this thing, I need this that, and man, it will cost a lot, and you will start to from refrain yourself from doing whatever that you really want, because you
Yeah.
already thought that it's going to be expensive, and in actual fact it doesn't have to be really expensive. And look at my podcast. I don't use expensive equipments, and where has it led me to? It has led me to Grant Cardone. It has led me to Gary Vee. It has led me to DP, you. It has led me to so many people around the world, and even people from Africa. Oh, there's one guy that's from Africa that I've interviewed as well, and people from Finland and people from whichever country. They came to Singapore, and my friends who brought them to Singapore, they automatically will refer them to me, to my podcast, and they will ask me to go and interview this guy, right? Or interview this girl, or interview this couple, or interview this amazing dudes who are really good in entrepreneurship, who are really amazing, who have that credential and things like that. So what's stopping you, right? If
Yeah.
it's the price that's stopping you, then lower down the budget. Start free. Start with Anchor, for example, right? I started off with my podcast with Anchor, and till now I'm still using Anchor. I'm not using Podbean, even though there are definitely a lot of great benefits from Podbean, because Podbean will help you to analyze iTunes and Spotify and all this other stuff. Not saying that Anchor doesn't, but Anchor has their own restrictions, even
Right.
though they say that there's certain benefits and all this other stuff. But yeah, it's the same. So yeah, if you want to start, if any one of you who are tuning in right now, you want to start small and then grow bigger and
Yeah.
better, and
Well, just start.
don't yeah,
Just
yeah, don't stop
start.
yourself.
I mean,
Yeah.
take a look at Rayson's example. I mean, he, again, I don't want to keep harping on the fact, but you're a young guy in a small country. You have very, I'm guessing, limited funds to buy equipment and stuff. So you take what you have. You start with just your smartphone. From there, over time, and as you get better, you may be able to invest in more stuff. Or if you become a big enough podcaster, you might catch the attention of some of these manufacturers of microphones and cameras and stuff. That's not an impossibility. And I'll be honest with you. As I sit here talking to you and then go to my A cam over there, which is a Canon 70D, and I come back to my main shot here off my Sony A6000, the only reason I have those cameras is because I had them before I started podcasting. They're just cameras that I had for taking still photos. And then I started looking into doing live streaming and found out that, oh, the cameras I already have can live stream. I don't have to buy anything. I've already bought it. And by the way, there's probably a lot of people out there in this audience right now that you guys have technology that can get you podcasting, and maybe even podcasting and live streaming simultaneously very easily already on your laptops. Or, if you've got a webcam, everyone's got to have a webcam for Zoom, right? If you've got a webcam, you can be a live streamer. If you've got a decent microphone, and by the way, I don't know about you, but a whole lot of my guests use these. iPod, Apple plug-in headphones with the microphone. The microphone they use is this microphone that's in right there, this tiny little thing. Well, guess what? The quality of it is good enough. It's not great. It's good enough. By the way, I just talked to a friend of mine who I interviewed on the podcast, and he interviewed someone who was on his iPhone for his podcast. And so he's like, oh, it's not going to be great audio. It was really good audio because it was a brand new Apple iPhone 13. And evidently the microphones on those things are fantastic. So you don't need an external mic. You don't have to use AirPod Pros or anything like that. You can talk right into the phone as long as it's fairly close to your face, and you'll get a great audio feed for anyone who wants to record you as a podcast guest, or if you want to start doing a podcast. So I would take a page out of the playbook that Rayson's written, and that is, don't start when it's perfect and you've got everything in alignment. Just start, period. Try it. Be embarrassed for 10 episodes. By the way, it doesn't matter. No one's going to know you're alive in podcast world. No one's going to hear it except maybe your mother. So go ahead and do it. Interview your friends. Interview your family. Interview anybody just to start the whole ball rolling. And this is my pro tip for anyone in podcasting. Edit your episodes yourself so that you burn the ums, so's, and wells out of your mouth. You'll notice that both Rayson and myself don't drop a lot of ums or filler words. Why? I know why. For me, I've had to cut them all out in edit. And I've gotten sick of cutting out ums and ahs and wells and so's and you knows. Because here in the United States where I live, you know is like something people always say, you know, that's a really interesting question. You know, you can't say you know every 2 seconds. So if you want to be a better public speaker, start a podcast, edit it yourself, and you will become a better, more confident public speaker, a better, more confident salesperson. a better, more confident networker, and I'll just say this, a better, more confident human being. Because these are transferable skills across everything you do in life.
Yep, I agree with you on that. Like legit, when you start to build your own podcast, or when you start your own speaking journey, or whatsoever journey that you want, it will always be something that you will stumble upon in terms of like the ums, the ahs, and all this other stuff, and not just the filler words. In fact, it's also your confidence level will start to boost up, especially as you grow with your own episodes of podcasts, and also at the same time talking to different people from different states, different countries. You start to realize a lot of stuff about yourself and around the world. You might be in that small little pond in Singapore, like myself, and then slowly it goes out. It goes to Nebraska, it goes to probably Atlanta, and then after that it goes to Canada, it goes to New Zealand, Australia, whichever country that you're exploring in, right? So it took me a while to become this version of Rayson Choo. So if you are going to start, you don't expect yourself to jump from level 1 to level 99 within like 5 months. It will not be so fast. Same goes with business and all this other stuff. It will take years, in fact. It took me for about 5 to 6 years. I started off 2017, like in terms of this podcast. I had this dream in 2014, but I only started off in 2017. And then it took me about, in fact, not 5 years, but I would say 4 years, right? 2017 to 2021 right now. It took me about 4 years plus to reach where I am right now. At the start, it was pretty bad at first. Like, I do not know what kind of questions to ask. I went improv and it didn't turn out really well because I have a lot of R's, I have a lot of ums, I have a lot of N, and it got me so sick of that. Like I was like, a lot of my speaking friends were telling me, "Hey, you got to cut this down. You're gonna do this. How about you try this method out, and then you stop those filler words. You don't have to keep saying this sentence again and again. You know, well, right? And it sinks into my mind. And even when I interviewed John Lee Dumas, right, at the episode uh, of like 80-ish. I can't remember the actual number, but I remembered it was like only this year when I interviewed Johnny Dumas, and he taught me how to ensure that I make my guests even more pleasant in a sense. To sum it up, he actually taught me not to yes, yes during my whole podcast, which I did a lot of time, and it pissed him off a bit, and I felt bad, and that was the time when I actually sat down and listened to what he says and what he said, because he is the grandmaster of podcasting, right?
Right.
Not just him. There's other people, right, that are also really brilliant in podcasting, like Steve Olsher, for example, and many more, right? This guy sat me down during my interview, which is a live. Unfortunately, it was really a LinkedIn live and Facebook live, and he he sounded pissed in a sense, even though his ego was high, because he has that stature in him, and he knew that he was expecting something awesome from this person that's going to interview him. But apparently, the ahas pissed him off because he actually had been through this process before. He had a lot of ahas and ums and all this other stuff during his uh, many, don't know how many hundreds of episodes before he actually realized that, hey, I have to stop. And that's where he talked to me about it on my podcast. And that's where I decided to, okay, I have to stop the ahas and the ums, and I have to just nod my head in silence, and I just learned from there, and I decided that, hey, this is really good. This is something that I should be practicing all this while, which I didn't, and I realized that, wow, this is something that it's like a lesson for me, I would say. So every time, even when, no matter how pro you are, no matter how long I would say years that you have been doing your niche, for example, like podcasting or marketing or whatsoever, you will meet this kind of mini bumps along the way, and you will get to learn through people like them who actually shared with you certain things, and that's where I actually learned myself that, oh, I've been making this mistake, and I realized that it's not too late. In fact, it's never too late unless if you decided to quit after that episode of podcast, which I didn't, right? And then that will be something negative in a sense. It will affect you, right? But
Yeah.
then I told myself, man, it's a monumental push for me. I'm gonna learn from this. I'm gonna work on it, and I'm gonna make sure it doesn't happen for the next episode. And guess what? Next episode, the ums and the ahas, and it got lesser, way lesser. And the following episode, it got even lesser to near zero. And then slowly, perfect, none. I don't really have that so many times. I just know when to use it, when not to, and it went perfectly fine.
Yeah, well, in the John Lee Dumas that Rayson's talking about has a podcast called Entrepreneurs on Fire, and
Yes.
it's, oh my God, it's a podcast that's one of the most popular in the kind of inspirational entrepreneurial space, if you will. And
Hmm.
if I remember correctly, when he started out, he had, I'm not going to get the number right, but it was like maybe 25 to 50 episodes in the can, meaning they were already produced before he went live with his podcast, because he was going to go live every day, I think, or he wanted to have release a new podcast every single day. And,
Yeah.
so anyway, that's worth listening to. And one of the things I always talk to people about when they're thinking about doing a podcast is find one that suits your style. Not that you want to copy, but you feel some affinity toward. For example, my podcast, I have 2 seconds of music at the front. That's 2 seconds more before I start talking. That's 2 seconds more than I want to have, because one of my favorite podcasts has no music, no intro, no nothing. Because I'm convinced that John Gruber of the talk show podcast knows my audience knows who I am. They know who I'm going to be talking to because they've read the show notes. I don't need to introduce anything. I don't need to waste any time. Let's go right into it. I don't quite do that, but that's my inspiration. That's kind of my, if I could be that put together, that's what I want to sound like. Other
Yeah.
people, like one of the most popular podcasts here in the United States is the New York Times, The Daily. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but the host of
Yeah.
that is a guy named Michael Barbaro. And he does a thing I call the Barbaro, which is the and because he's interviewing people, and unlike what Rayson was just talking about, he does it on purpose to indicate that we're in a conversation together. I'm
Yeah.
listening to you, and and so that's why I call it the Barbaro, and I choose not to Barbaro ever if possible. I will occasionally agree with you if you've said something that I particularly agree with. And frankly, I've I agree with a lot of what Rayson's doing, what he's talked about on this podcast. And as we get around to wrapping up this podcast, I do want to let you have a second or two to talk about the Raygacy show, what it's about, what you've got coming up, and where people can find it.
Oh, sure. So for the Raygacy show is all about, I would say, picking the brains of the best entrepreneurs around the world. People like DP, people like Steve Sims, Grant Cardone, Gary Vaynerchuk, and many more, right? All this, in fact, is to actually enlighten and to give more millennial entrepreneurs a guided sense where to go, how to do their things, and what are the inspirational stories that they can actually pick up from, and then from there they in fact can learn from all these amazing people, and they can apply it into their businesses. And apparently quite a number of them that actually followed this podcast has actually gotten a lot of enlightenment, and I'm really grateful that all these people that has came on board on the podcast has shared so many gems, so many golden nuggets with me and my audience as well. And even like during the live interview that we had, like with DP, it was so amazing where there are people who wanted to immediately go and buy his book, and they are from US, and they're not based in Singapore, right? They're all watching from the States, they're watching from other parts of the world, and people from England, there are people from Malaysia, there are people from, I would say, Thailand, and all these other parts of the world. They are watching and they are tuning into the podcast as well. So this is a podcast that is universal. It is not just like, oh, it's meant for Singaporeans only. But no, it's meant for everyone, because every businesses, their systems and techniques and tactics and all, they're all similar. I wouldn't say 100% the same, but they are probably 70%, 80% similar for each and every niche that are doing businesses, right? So in my opinion, you can actually tune into this podcast. You can listen to the first episode, or whichever episode that you want to listen to, which you find that is really inspiring and interesting for you. Go ahead and tune in, and you can find them on Anchor. You can find it on Spotify, iTunes, and all the other major podcast platforms. And if you want to watch it live and you want to have your questions answered, for example, you can go on the Facebook Live and LinkedIn Live whenever we are having any guests on the show. And it is spelled as Raygacy. So it's the Raygacy Show. You can find it on all these major platforms. And what's coming up next is we are going to have a few other entrepreneurs that's from the States. People like David Wood, people like Robert Railpel, and etc. So stay tuned for those amazing episodes, and we are planning to go even have people coming on to sponsor, have their things sponsored to us. So we are getting sponsorships, starting to have sponsorships as well. So we'll see how it goes, and if it turns out well, I will let people know on my social media as well.
Well, there you go. Rayson Choo, a guy you should know, especially if you want to know what people from Singapore are thinking about the world of entrepreneurial, let's call it the world of entrepreneurial inspiration. Yeah, sounds good to me. Well, Rayson, I want to thank you so much for being on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. As always, I would love for Nonfiction podcast listeners to like, subscribe, refer, and review this podcast wherever you find it, because that really does help other people find it. And I appreciate you for that. Also, I'm going to throw this out there to listeners. If you're at all interested, you can download 3 free PDF worksheets. Let me say that again. I want to offer this to anybody who's listening, the opportunity to download 3 free PDF worksheets from nonfictionbrand.com/gift, and that'll help you get started on your personal branding journey, if you will. And again, I just want to say a big, super big thank you to Rayson Choo of Singapore and the Raygacy Show for being on the podcast. That's it for me. I'm your host, DP Knudten, and he is
Rayson Choo.
And I'll be talking at you again live, streaming, and on the podcast next time. Bye-bye.